Hello and welcome to Edison TV. Today I'm joined by Balaji Gandhi, SVP of Investor Relations at Phreesia. Phreesia are a healthcare software business with a focus on patient intake management. The company's listed on the New York Stock Exchange and capitalized at around $1.4 billion. Balaji, many thanks for joining us today. Can you start with an introduction to the business and particularly for the European audience who are less familiar with the US healthcare landscape, what exactly does patient intake management mean?
Sure, happy to. So just, by way of background, I think the term patient intake management is actually something Phreesia came up with many years ago. We probably should have, copyrighted it or something. There's a slide in our investor deck on slide 8 that a lot of people refer to, and it's basically got a couple of pillars. Patient access, which is like your scheduling and booking appointments. Patient registration, which is a lot of the questionnaires and consent forms that you have to fill out. uh, Revenue cycle, which is patient payments to us, and collecting patient payments at the point of care, or at the point of sale, if you will. And then we have a whole host of clinical support tools, which is like patient reported outcomes that you have to collect. And so, if you think about all of that being done at the point of sale or point of entry, um, just like all other verticals, whether it's hospitality, restaurants, what have you, a lot of that stuff happens in a very digitized way at the point of sale, and that's really what Freeze is trying to do.
Thank you. And can you talk about how your suite of offerings plays into some of the key thematics that we're seeing in healthcare right now, things such as digitization, value-based care, and of course the acute physician shortages that we're seeing both in the UK and in the US?
Absolutely. And so historically, I think Phreesia, our value prop is, cash collections has actually been a really important part of it, which is, it's not an insignificant amount of money. It's almost $100 billion in the US alone, that's transferred from a patient to a provider. And when you have an integrated platform with registration and payments, we just improve cash flows. More recently, in the last, call it, decade or so, as you pointed out, there are some other issues. Obviously, the labor situation has accelerated in COVID. So there's a lot of these tasks that have to be done by people, and Phreesia's always been a solution to that, but it's somewhat of an accelerant with what's happened in the pandemic. Value-based care, the biggest, sort of connection to what Phreesia does in value-based care is, in order to participate in these programs, providers have to do a lot more things. They have to collect patient reported outcomes. They have to then discreetly take that information that they collect from a patient and put it into the right systems of record, and then submit it to a payer. All of that just to be able to participate. And again, something that Phreesia is very good at. We have, 80% utilization rates. So 80% of the patients are actually, self-service utilizing Phreesia. And then we have a whole host of integrations with all of the major systems of record, so we can put that information back in there. So that's really probably our biggest value there. And then digitization, again, a lot of the things that were done on a clipboard historically over many years, depending on the specialty you're in, depending on the geography you're in, we have all those sort of forms now digitized in a library, and we can get you up and running pretty quickly, and get off of paper and fax and scanners and all that stuff.
Thank you. And the business operates across both the healthcare providers and the life sciences verticals. Can you discuss how the offering is different across both of those different markets?
Sure. So this is really, I think, important. It's the platform is the same, and so whether it's all the things we just talked about on registration and revenue cycle, what have you, or it's life sciences, it's one single platform. This is very important for our engineers and our product folks as they continue to refresh the product and come up with new solutions. So think about the journey. You come into a physician's office or a health system, and you're being onboarded and you're checking in. What we do is, because of our the platform's capability to pull all the disparate data parts, we can target a patient on behalf of a life sciences organization in a very different way than, let's just say, mainstream media could. Now, as you're going through that interview and that journey, we have to get patient consent, and that's very important. We do not sort of sell this data to third parties. What we do is we're able to target patients better with their consent, and then show them a targeted message as they go through that journey. So it is the same platform, but that's tremendously valuable to life sciences clients, as you can imagine, with all the different specialties that we work with.
Thanks. And now turning towards data and AI, can you discuss how Phreesia uses data and AI, or gives your customers the data to be able to use AI in order to enhance patient outcomes?
Yeah, so the ability to gather information in a real time fashion is really critical to Phreesia. So again, our engineers and our product people, the architecture of this stuff in terms of collecting data, storing it, and being able to access it in real time is important. I can just give you a couple of different examples. So, we talked about all the appointment booking, knowing when a slot's open, is really important. So we have a product called Appointment Accelerator that knows when Dan has canceled an appointment or hasn't shown up, but Balaji needs the same appointment. It can show it to me. So that's one example, I think, is what you're talking about. But insurance verification, knowing that you're Aetna and that your copay is $25, that's real time information and critically important. And then patient reported outcomes we talked about earlier, just knowing, what your score is on a depression screen or and what have you, and then putting that into the right system of record. These can all actually enhance outcomes, and providers can't actually affect the outcomes unless they have this information available to them in a very easy, fashion. So those are just some examples.
Thank you. And now looking towards the key growth drivers of the business, can you discuss, what the key growth vectors for Phreesia are?
So we try to keep it simple. I think the first one is just the footprint in and of itself. So you could measure it the way I did by visits, which is sort of very important to us. There's on a client basis, there's about 50,000 clients in the universe to sell into. We have, as of July 31st, the quarter that ended, just shy of 3,000. So, but so that's single digit sort of market share if you want to think of it that way. But that's one huge, vector is just keep growing clients. Obviously, in recent quarters, that's been a bigger component of growth. Revenue per client is also important. It's a KPI. It's something the management team's measured on. But again, all three revenue streams. So, when we think about a client and, we think about like all the different ways we can monetize landing a client, and some have a longer tail to them than others. We're land and expand. So just landing a logo, we have lots more seats, if you will, we can sell. We have lots of subscription modules we can sell, and we can continue to send targeted messages on behalf of life science clients within those same clients. So, all three of those matter. So that's revenue per client. And then, there's new products to develop. And, one just example, and, we're not a highly acquisitive company, but we acquired, the exclusive worldwide rights to the patient activation measure, which is a very interesting horizontal patient reported outcome measure. It's actually the NHS in the UK is actually using as well, and CMS in the US. So that's another example of, can we sort of add new arcs to our growth?
Thank you. And now, finally, management took the decision, I guess, 18 months or so ago, to actually increase investment back into the business, and that has compressed EBITDA margins for a little while. But you seem to be coming through that and seeing some good growth. Can you discuss that and give us an idea of how quick and how strong you would expect the returns to be from that incremental investment that you put in?
Sure. And first of all, this is something that's pretty consistent with the history of the company. I mean, I think the public market investors may not fully appreciate that, but as a private company, the company went through periods of increased investment, went into negative EBITDA, and that's what led us to get to 100 million in revenue, and when we were able to go public, where we were profitable on an adjusted EBITDA basis. And so this was sort of another intentional dip in that. And if you just think about the company, we were doing about 54 million patient visits, 100 million of revenue, and nominally EBITDA positive in fiscal 2019, which is right before we went public. And we did 125 million, so we grew 25%, stayed EBITDA positive in our first year as a public company in fiscal 2020. And so all of these investments were really to take advantage of the fact that we went public. With one of the reasons was really to have access to the capital markets. We had exited all of our private investors during calendar 2020. And so if you to sort of answer your question about where is this all going, you look at the targets we put out for this year for fiscal 23, and then you look at some longer range targets we put out for fiscal 25. If we are successful in executing on those targets, we will have achieved a quarter in fiscal 25 of $125 million in revenue and be be profitable again on an adjusted EBITDA basis. So we will have a quarter that will look like a year, really over 5 fiscal years, almost all of that organic, and almost all of that because of that dip we took, and it was very intentional. So we chose that path because we thought that was more of a durable, sticky way to grow than being more acquisitive. A lot of companies in our situation and stage tend to buy a lot of things. It's not in our DNA. We look at things like that give us a unique sort of power, like insignia with the patient activation measure, but generally speaking, that's sort of why we did what we did, and that's where how you're going to see the sort of the U-shaped turn and the return on all that investment.
Balaji, very interesting conversation. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and we look forward to that as well.